This is Dr. Richard Tran from Color Chiropractic here in Bellingham, Washington. I have the distinct pleasure of being able to interview someone that I've met a couple of years ago and recently got back in touch with. Her name is Nancy Southern. She's a creative life coach here in our community. And what I wanted to do with these types of interviews is to allow you to know more about the different healers in our community. Maybe know more about them as a person, their journey, in addition to how they work, and really how you can find out more about them. So, Nancy, welcome to the show, I would
thanks.
say.
This is fun.
Yeah. But, why don't we start off by, getting to know you a little bit more. Tell us about your journey, how you really came to be, where you are today.
Right. Well, I grew up in a family, like many families, that had problems, and, there was emotional suffering. My mom had a rough time. And so having grown up, and I think being a highly sensitive person from the time I was very, very little, I could sense her suffering. And, any child wants to help their parents, feel better because you love them.
Right.
And over time, I think by the time I was graduating from college and looking for a career, she was also an artist, so I wanted to be an artist. So I pursued art for a while, but this underlying desire to relieve suffering was really a guiding principle. And I had my own issues, I'll be honest with you. And so over the years, I pursued not only my own art, but then I went back to school after I got my art degree several years later and got an MSW.
What's an MSW?
Master's in Social Work.
Okay.
As a clinical psychotherapist and mental health educator, and I worked in that field in the fairly traditional way that it was done way back then. We won't talk about how long ago that was. But it was a while back.
Yeah.
And I found that traditional mental health work back then was just too difficult for me, empathically, because I was overly sensitive and didn't know how to really make a difference for people. The tools were helpful, but they seemed to take a long time, and I need results. I'm all about results. So I left the traditional field, went back into the world of art and color and interior design, did that for many years. And then later, because I also have a very strong spiritual life, wanted to explore that and became a spiritual life coach over time. And so there was still the creative part that wanted to work its way in. And eventually, over the last probably 10 years, it's become being a creative life coach by melding that all together. But probably the biggest turning point for me, Richard, was back in 2002. I'd been feeling poorly for a while, and my energy just seemed to be going downhill. And I thought, goodness, I've got to do something for my health, or I'm not going to be here much longer. And I've never been comfortable with the help I received in traditional allopathic pathways. And so my entire life I've pursued alternative health practices because that's what seemed to work for me.
Right.
And so in 2002, I was referred to a man who lived not far from me, who was practicing as a chiropractor, but did something called the Brimhall Method, and I think you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And so,
one of the techniques that we do.
Yeah. And so I was introduced to that, and one of the tools that he used in my healing journey involved this thing called tapping. And I didn't really know what it was, but I knew intuitively in the work that we did for about a 6 weeks period of time that the tapping was instrumental in the breakthrough change I had, that many of the physical problems and even the psychological and emotional distress I was under was due to an unresolved childhood trauma.
Okay.
And so this thing called tapping, I knew, was significant. And so from 2002 to 2007, I just continued to tap on myself with, at then, I only knew 3 specific points that he used in the treatments with me. And so in 2007, I had an opportunity to attend a workshop for something called EFT, and that stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques.
Okay.
And that's a very specific way of combining ancient Chinese acupuncture and certain points on the face and on the body. And that's about the most of the ones I use. That system really lit up my mind as an empowering tool to help all kinds of people with all kinds of problems.
Mm-hmm.
So I did all kinds of training to get as good at being an EFT practitioner as I could back then. Started integrating it into the spiritual coaching practice that I was already doing, and people started changing. It was really remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And they would experience relief in very short periods of time relative to, say, back when I was in the mental health field doing traditional psychotherapy, which could take weeks or months to even feel like, a small amount of change.
Well, what types of problems did you actually became resolved through the tapping?
Everything from physical pain to long-held emotional distress, unresolved grief. Like if someone had lost a significant other, a spouse, a parent, a child, and just couldn't seem to get past that, gripping grief that would just come over them with almost no warning, being triggered by seemingly simple things. This method seemed to break that pattern that was cyclical and easily repeated.
Uh-huh.
Right. I had migraines before I learned to tap, and I seldom ever get a headache now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it made a huge difference in that. And it changed my whole outlook on my ability to feel what I'm going to feel but not get caught in my own emotions.
Right. To really let go of the attachments to those feelings and having them create symptoms that we really don't want.
Right. And so I've helped people with headaches, backaches, locked shoulders, trauma over a divorce or a loss of a job. I mean, it can be pretty much any way. Help people with high blood pressure normalize their blood pressure. I mean, it's really remarkable.
Well, let me ask you something here, is that, how do you know whether a person's problem is actually linked up with something, let's say, a past trauma or emotions?
I usually don't know until we're working with them. The man who developed EFT, his name was Gary Craig, a very brilliant, actually trained as an engineer, but had a real interest in human potential and helping people realize more of their God-given gifts and potential to thrive in the world. And he learned, as he was teaching other people EFT, he said, try it on anything. You never know what's really underneath anyone's problem. And so over over 10 years that I've been using this, 15 now, I'm counting myself, I try it on anything. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, we try something else. But at least it gives people an idea of whether or not there is an emotional element underpinning their distress or their pain or their problem in such a way that it's like a broken record. It just keeps repeating.
Right.
Yeah, and now there's brain science to help support how and why it works. But back in the beginning, 20 years ago, when it first became known and people were using it, we really didn't know why it worked.
Right.
It just worked. So if it works, use it,
In a way, that's how chiropractic started, too, because, people would come to chiropractors and be able to get these wonderful miracles, but they didn't really know, the chiropractors themselves may not have necessarily known how they were able to do it.
Right.
And in the end, we more accept the fact that we don't have all the answers.
No.
And that the body has a unique wisdom to be able to...
And I count on that.
To be able to express itself, but then sometimes we actually create interferences through our own living that can hinder the body's ability to work properly and to sometimes causing these different issues.
Right. And the potential for the body and the mind to heal itself is always present. And so I see myself as sort of like someone who encourages or empowers or guides people to find their way into that way of connecting the mind and body in such a way that it can heal itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you, when you're starting off with a person, they may have their own set of issues or their own, whether it's a physical malady or it's a certain emotional trauma that they've had to
or
work
just
through.
a sense of loss and confusion. Oftentimes I work with women who are in that time of life where maybe they're in transition from being moms and working to wanting to pursue their own creative interests, or just not sure what's next, or some part of their life just doesn't feel like it's working quite right. And so they'll come to me thinking that they have to fix a problem. And because I also come from the creative standpoint, which is almost 180 degree different from problem solving, I call it, you're either a problem solver or you're a conscious creator. And so if the focus is always on solving the problem, the subconscious mind begins to believe that if that's where you're putting your attention, it's going to continue to give you more problems to solve. So if I can show them that problems can be solved through using tools like EFT or other tools that I teach, then I show them how to turn that towards, well, if you don't have this problem anymore, what do you really want?
Right, because you have to replace it with something.
Yes.
It's not like the energy just doesn't go anywhere.
Right, I mean, you can just be at peace. That's one option. You can just be peaceful and take life as it comes. But underneath most people seeking to solve a problem is a desire for something else.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
And so, gee, I wish I could get rid of this back weight because I'd be out climbing a mountain right now if I didn't have it.
Right. It's more about climbing the mountain.
Yes. Yes. And so when I show them that they can work with their own mind and body to relieve the distress that seems to be preventing them from doing what they want to do, then they begin to trust that they can change, and then it gets easier to move towards the desired result.
So how do you really cultivate those positive types of behaviors that really propel them towards the goals that they really want?
Well, I don't do it. They do it for themselves. Because once the perceived block is gone, they come up with their own way of moving forward. Because their inner guidance system is far greater and more valuable to them than mine. So simply by sometimes removing the block or turning it into a stepping stone where they can see themselves moving forward again, then the idea comes naturally to mind. Oh, and now that that's not happening, I can go do this, or I can call so-and-so, or I can make that connection, or take that class, or make that trip. I'll give you an example. I was working with a man not too long ago who had some health issues, but mostly he intuitively knew that he was still grieving the loss of his wife from 40 years before. He'd never really been able to complete that process. And he had all kinds of health problems in his heart, which that makes perfect sense because they were, deeply in love. His heart was hurt greatly by her loss. And so he had heart problems, he had high blood pressure problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as I began to not only teach him how to use tapping to access those buried emotions and give them voice and expression and get through them, then his health began to improve. And one of the things that he told me before we started working together is, I don't even feel like it's safe for me to want to make a trip to Mexico, because what if I start having one of these panic attacks or my heart begins to race? I'm afraid to be too far from home.
Right.
And after working with him for about 6 or 7 weeks, he was actually a student in a group class. By the end of the class, he told me that things had leveled out enough, and with the endorsement of his doctor, he and his friend had planned a trip to Mexico.
Oh, great.
And they just got back. So that's one of those experiences where the desire to go to Mexico was always there.
Yeah, right.
But these physical and emotional problems were getting in the way, really. And so I taught him how to both imagine that he could go to Mexico. There's your stretching your intention towards, I'd like to believe it's possible to go, but my body won't let me, to dealing with this old emotion that was affecting him physiologically. And any emotional trauma that is that pronounced, and even small ones, in the EFT world we talk about big T trauma and little T trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Because if an imprint is made where we make a judgment about ourselves or that experience that says, oh, that's the way it was and that's the way it's always going to be, or I couldn't get over it then, so I'll never get over it, is simply not true.
Mm-hmm.
But it's how we live with it.
Right.
So when we address the issue that seems to be blocking the way
Mm-hmm.
and convert that into a stepping stone toward a new desired result of him feeling better, getting more even keel with his bodily responses to the high blood pressure and all that, he then was able to move towards the vision of making a trip with his new lady friend to go to Mexico.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, very good. Well, I know that a lot of us, whether we want to admit it or not, probably have a lot of this type of baggage that really prevents us from being able to really reach our goals. And, by having, since we've allowed these things to live throughout our life,
Mm-hmm.
And
oftentimes not purposefully.
Yeah, whether we're aware of it or not.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That sometimes what you need is just someone to be able to listen to, but provide solutions that will help them to get to where they want to be.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right. Because I totally believe in the innate potential of every human being to improve their life,
Mm-hmm.
one way or the other. And sometimes I'll get clients that think life has to look like this in order for me to be happy. But once we deal with what seems to be stopping them from having the happiness that they want,
Mm-hmm.
then they suddenly don't want that thing they thought was going to make them happy, because it really wasn't. It was what the mind created as a possible solution rather than a true desired result.
Mm. So maybe in the shedding process, they become aware of what they really want.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And that's oftentimes buried down below all of the, the unresolved feelings.
Interesting.
And when people come to me, almost feeling guilty for having a problem,
Mm-hmm.
I love to tell people, I hear you're suffering. I understand that you think you should have been able to fix this. Why do I still have this problem? And I want them to know it's not your fault that
Mm-hmm.
you still have that problem. Something happened along the way that anchored it in your mind, in your energy field, in your emotional body, and it's not your fault that you haven't been able to move past it. And I want them to also know there's something they can also do about it. And that's my job, is to teach them the tools
Mm-hmm.
that empower them to move beyond it and create a new reality.
Great. Well, this has been wonderful to be able to find out more about you here
Mm-hmm.
and how you work. Are there different types of ways that people can be able to know more about, what you do, or
Sure.
do you do talks in the community? Are there
teach
websites?
classes, yes, and I have local websites. You can either go to happytapping.net or outrageouscreativity.com. They both take you to the same place, and there's a place on there where you can sign up for my newsletter if you'd like to receive that.
How often does that come out?
About once a month.
Okay.
And there are some archived talks, recordings, articles that I've written. I've also do local classes, and my email address is on there. So if you want to email me, I'll send you a link so you can get on my local email list for when I do local programming, so that you can decide, I want to do that, I'm ready for that, and then you can just sign up and join me.
Great.
I do open tapping circles about once a month, and that's just an opportunity to come and experience EFT to see if it's something that you're curious about or want to know more about. And even in a short hour and a half of just tapping on all kinds of things with whoever shows up, it's remarkable how people will say, wow, I had no idea,
Mm-hmm.
That something that simple could be that powerful, and it really is.
Well, I'm looking forward. I'm actually going to be checking out some of your workshops that you're doing tonight, too.
Yeah,
so
right.
I've heard a lot of great things about EFT. If you want to look it up for yourself, emotional freedom technique. I know that Nancy has, is pretty innovative. So you've actually even taken it to your own style.
Absolutely,
as well,
too. And most EFT practitioners have been doing this for a while. You make it your own because you see the potential. And Gary Craig, the founder, said, do that, because when you find your way of working with the tool, that is most empowering of me as a practitioner, then I'm also more empowering to the people that I work with so that they can get the results they want.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, we just wanted to be able to thank Nancy again for being able to be here. I'm sure that we'll probably have other interviews in the future too. Feel free to contact me via email or visit our website so that you can see more of these different interviews, because I'd really like for people to know the different people in our community that can be able to help you to get to where you need to be. So this is Dr. Richard Tran from Color Chiropractic signing off. And remember, when it comes to your health, life is always better when you live it in full color. Thanks a lot.
Yes.
Have a great day.